Hi, everybody, and welcome to another module in Journalism 101, Critical Analysis of the Mass Media. I'm your course instructor, Dr. Paul Trout. Today, we talk about one of my favorite areas of the mass media, and actually two areas, as they are combined in your chapter this semester, and that's audio media. And the chapters themselves are broken down, the chapter itself is broken down into two categorical areas, two separate evolving media that had significant interrelationships with each other, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century. And that's audio media, recording industry and music, and then radio. So let's talk about the recording industry first. We know from carrying on from some of our functions that we described in the earlier chapters in your readings that audio media can be characterized as having several functions in society, things that they perform that help kind of keep society glued together, provide for shared experiences. And of course, similar with print media, audio media, music recordings, for example, provide an entertainment function for many of us. This is a very, very popular medium historically for younger generations. Yours is not the first generation to really enjoy certain kinds of music, to wrap a lot of your day around your favorite musical artists, to engage in music while performing other activities as well. Music often is reflective of culture as well, particularly youth culture. And so music over the generations, if you know anything about musical genres and the history of music, you know that jazz as a particular genre carries with it the transmission of certain cultural, ethnic, historical, urban values. Compare that to country music. Compare that to the British invasion that I experienced as a kid growing up with transistor radios in the 1960s. Compare that to more modern day music. I think we all understand how music gets tied up into helping to advance and reinforce certain cultural ideals. Audio media obviously can also perform an education function, both in terms of audio books, recorded speeches, that kind of thing. So audio media provide these functions to varying degree, and in some cases even more so than in the past. And I would say that's particularly true in terms of cultural transmission, given the overwhelming abundance of downloadable music via digital media formats. I can't spend as much time as I'd like to in this 15-minute video talking about the history of the music industry, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the major technological developments. For the overwhelming range of the history of the recording industry, the industry was characterized by something known as analog recording. Analog is a word, it's a Greek word, and it means copy. And as you read through this part of the chapter, you're going to be reading about early inventions that represented mechanical techniques for copying sound that was recorded. As I speak, my voice vibrates molecules and atoms in the air. Recording devices, and the early recording devices like a large horn that narrowed down to a finer point, that was then connected to a sharp needle that was laid into foil or bakelite plastic or even wax and rotated. My voice would vibrate that needle and create a copy of the vibrations of my voice. Well, that's what analog has always done for the longest time. Now, most people in your generation, unless you're an aficionado of recordings, of discs, I don't mean discs, of records, LPs or 45s, you really don't even know what I'm talking about, because most of you are listening to digital transmissions these days, which are altogether different. I'll talk about that in a moment. So you're going to read about some of the various technological innovations that sometimes took off and developed and created their own industries, and other times were replaced by newer and more improved technologies but you'll read about some of these early mechanical analog devices like Edison's talking machine, about the gramophone, the first real flat disc, if you will, flat disc recorder, flat disc playback device. You'll read about LPs, long playing records. And you should know that the reason that these LPs are the size that they are is because the inventor of this technology, who was an audio engineer working for CBS at the time, he loves classical music, and he wanted to be able to record one movement of a symphony on one side of a record. And so he did the math and calculated how many revolutions it would take and what the size and the speed of that revolution would have to be. So you'll read about LPs. And of course, along with that came 45s concurrent with all that. My generation remembers 8-track tape players. And it was my generation that also first began to discover and purchase on a wide-scale basis audio cassettes. Malleable recording media, recording on tape, was actually technology developed by the Germans during the Second World War. And the first audio tape recorder and playback machine was discovered by the Allies as they moved through Berlin after the fall of the Nazi Empire. And they discovered this technology that had already been developed by the Germans. This was still analog recording because instead of scratching grooves into a record, essentially you were rearranging magnetized particles on a thin mylar tape. Same technology, only transferred to a different medium, essentially. So you'll read about tape technology. And then, of course, one of the major revolutions in this industry that kicked into high gear in the late 70s, 1980s, was disc technology. And we moved from analog to digital reproduction of sound. No longer were we throwing microphones essentially in front of things that were making music or noise or singing and recording them by creating sympathetic vibrations that were, through something known as an audio transducer device, being reduced to a signal, electrical signal going through a wire and then amplified at the other end. Now we had technology because of computing that was able to sample music at a very, very fast rate and convert that music signal, those pulses, those sounds, those aberrations, those frequencies in the air, to reduce those to binary code, simply a combination of ones and zeros. And because of digital reproduction of sound, it is an exact reproduction of the sound. And because it's an exact reproduction of the sound as recorded in a digital file, every time you download that file and play that file, every time you download that file and burn that file to a different medium for consequent playback, it's as perfect as the original copy. And that's one of the major advantages of digital recording technologies, is that they are essentially full reproductions, 100% reproductions, compared to, say, record technology and tape technology, where you're always losing something in consequent generations of your recording. Now, of course, many of you are listening to music without ever having a physical product in hand, other than the recordable and the playback device. And so digital downloads now are the medium of choice, if you will, or the technological platform of choice for many of you, in terms of how you manage music, arrange music, store music, and playback music. And of course, this is the major means today by which the music industry is trying to make money. The industry, of course, has gone through massive changes as well. The recording industry is in the business of creating, promoting, and distributing music. And as you'll read in this part of the chapter, the major labels, the few that there are, control the industry, but it's the independent producers who are making the majority of today's music. And that's a trend that's happened because of digitization. because of computerization and because of the fact that many of you, probably who are watching this little lectet, have the capacity to record music in your own rooms, in your own mini recording studio. So computer technology has made it very feasible for most of us essentially to record, edit, produce, and distribute music via the internet. That's very different than 15 or even 20 years ago, when they were still reliant on recording studios and significant capital investments to do that. So as a result, there has been this incredible decline in sales of physical product. Unless you are part of that niche market now that enjoys records, and you go to used record stores and you purchase that kind of platform for playback, there have been tremendous declines in physical products. Obviously, an increase in download sales or downloading sales, and of course, I won't point fingers at anybody, but we know that many people in the world are utilizing utilities, computer utilities that allow them to download that music for free. And sometimes we make this a debate or discussion topic in classes like this. And the concerns we have about illegal file sharing of music is that we want to make sure that the creative industry remains robust. We want to make sure that artists are protected in terms of the creation of their works. Otherwise, you and I will suffer in the long run because people won't have the capital incentive to create music, to write new songs, to produce music. So just from an economic standpoint, and as a lover of recorded music, like many of you, I encourage you to not partake in piracy. I encourage you to download music and pay for it because you are supporting an industry and you are ultimately supporting a creative endeavor. And the fact that a few of you think you can do this, perhaps, and that the industry won't be impacted, well, you just begin to multiply the few of you by the potential millions of people who aren't paying for music. And we run into concerns, and there is the potential that you and I might not discover new music or have new music hit our ears as much as we used to because people are not as inclined because they're not being rewarded to do that. So you'll also read about how monetizing of this industry is moving forward. There are some changes. For example, who knew a couple of years ago that ringtones would be a new way for the industry to revitalize itself and to find yet another way to charge for the music that it produces. So that's the end of this first little section on the recording industry. This is a fascinating industry. I know many of you are interested perhaps in going into this part of the business. I look forward to talking to you about the radio industry in part 2. Thanks for watching.